I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano, and this is Freedom Watch. On this program, you will not often hear arguments in favor of higher taxes. But what happens when the public's desire to cut taxes is stronger than its desire to cut government spending? And might free market advocates such as the supply-siders of the Reagan years have inadvertently contributed to the problem by urging tax cuts without making as serious an effort to shrink government programs? With the U.S. government's deficit this year alone over $1.9 trillion and the total federal debt over $14 trillion, is it no wonder that investors are nervous, the dollar has weakened, and the economy is shaky? But the public still complains when services are cut and applauds when their taxes are cut. You can't have it both ways. Politicians are aware of that contradiction, and they happily exploit it. Is there any way out of this bind? Joining us now to talk about this is Bruce Bartlett, who worked for Congressman Ron Paul and President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and who blames his former buddies, the supply-siders, and their tax cuts for some of our current problems in his new book, The American Economy. Bruce, welcome to Freedom Watch, and thank you for sending me a copy of the book.
Thank you.
How did we free market supporters cause this mess?
Well, here's what happened. In the late 1970s, when I was working for Jack Kemp and we were inventing supply-side economics, we viewed it as a problem of our political system that Republicans were so in favor of a balanced budget that they were willing to support higher taxes to balance the budget. And then what happened is the deficit just went up some more, and then taxes went up some more. And sometimes these were legislated, and in the 1970s there was a lot of bracket creep, and taxes were not being cut. They were just ratcheting upwards and upwards and upwards. And people like Jack Kemp said, we've got to change the rules of the game. Let's just cut taxes. And of course, that's what happened with Proposition 13 in California as well.
All right. When Jack Kemp,
let's hope that that brings downward pressure on spending.
Understood, but we know it didn't. And when Jack Kemp and others persuaded Ronald Reagan to cut taxes, but not to change spending, did they not realize that the government would borrow or would print money so that it could keep spending at the rates it was spending before it cut taxes? And didn't they perceive the consequences of that behavior?
Well, I think that there was the hope that there was a political maximum to the deficit, and that once deficits got up to a certain level, that there would be an outcry from the public that would put pressure on Congress to cut spending. But also, Jack Kemp, people like Jack Kemp were never obsessed with balancing the budget. They thought we could run deficits of a certain size, but clearly the deficits we now have and are projected to have are vastly beyond the pale.
All right, so I'm not sure that I get your argument, Bruce. Is your argument that we should not have had the Reagan tax cuts, or we should not have had the George W. Bush tax cuts unless we had accompanying spending cuts? Or is your argument that we need to raise taxes so that we can keep spending at the rate at which we're spending without adding to the deficit?
Well, my argument is that this idea that we can starve the beast just by cutting taxes demonstrably does not work. One of the things that restrained spending in the past was that people did not want to pay higher taxes for the higher spending. But now we have a situation where Republicans say we must never raise taxes for any reason, no matter what, no matter how large the deficit.
Even to balance the budget.
For any reason. And the result is that spending has gone up and taxes have gone down, and this is simply an untenable situation.
How about if we starved the government? I like to use the phrase shrink the government down to the confines imposed on it by the Constitution, by getting rid of the Federal Reserve, which of course lets the government print all the cash it wants, and get rid of federal borrowing. How about if the government had to live on a budget like the rest of us? That would balance the budget and shrink the government down to where it ought to be, or at least to a level beyond which the taxpayers wouldn't let it go.
Well, if you're saying we should cut spending to the current level of taxation, I'm sure a lot of people would agree with you, but right at the moment, that would require cutting spending on the order of $1.5 trillion or more to almost $2 trillion. And I don't see any way we can do that other than by literally abolishing the Defense Department, literally abolishing every single government program other than Social Security and Medicare, and we'd have to take a big chunk out of them as well.
So you think the welfare state? You think the welfare state is with us forever? And free marketers like I am, people who believe that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security is unconstitutional, have a hopeless argument to make.
With all due respect, Judge, yes.
What can we do about this? I mean, do you really want a value-added tax? Do you really want us to become like Europe? Do you really want the federal government to knock on my door and say, give me your money so that I can give it away in your name?
Well, the government has taxing power, and it's going to use it if there is no other way available for it to finance its spending. Therefore, I think taxes are inevitably going to rise, and the only question is how. I think it would be a grave mistake to substantially increase income tax rates. I think it would be better to have some sort of broad-based consumption tax, and that would be part of a budget deal that would also cut entitlement programs, cut Medicare, cut domestic discretionary programs, and cut defense as well. And I think if you packaged all of that together, we could get within striking distance of a balanced budget.
Should we keep things that are obviously unconstitutional, like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, that are bleeding us dry just because generations of Americans have become accustomed to them? We know they don't work. We know they're Ponzi schemes. We know they bleed us dry. We know there are more efficient ways to address this. Why don't we get rid of them? Why don't we get rid of the Department of Education? What do we need a Department of Commerce for?
Well, I think those are very nice questions to ask in a philosophical seminar, but as a political reality, Congress is never going to abolish those programs. The people who benefit from them have veto power. The elderly are the largest voting bloc in our society, and that's getting bigger. Last year, when Barack Obama suggested cutting Medicare to finance health care reform, the Republican Party's official position was, we must never cut Medicare for any reason.
I agree with you that is what their official position was, and they're no more devoted to the free market than the Democrats are. But you worked for two very prominent supporters of the free market. You worked for Congressman Ron Paul and for President Ronald Reagan. Did either of them accept the inevitability of the welfare state?
I think Reagan did. Certainly Ron Paul to this day does not, and his views are probably identical to yours in that respect. And I think it's certainly a good idea for us to debate these issues, but I live in the real world. I'm trying to deal with the potential of a fiscal meltdown that would put our country into the same kind of condition that Greece is in. And I think if the price of preventing that is that we have to have some increase in revenues, then I think that's a price that has to be paid.
Is there any real difference between your views and the views of Democrats in the Senate today who want to regulate everything from what my bank can charge me at an ATM machine to what my dentist can charge me if I have to pay for some dental work over the course of a couple of months?
No, I don't believe in that. I'm an old-fashioned fiscal conservative who thinks the deficit matters. If you think the deficit doesn't matter, there's no point in us having this discussion. But I think the deficit is something important in and of itself, quite apart from the issue of total spending, which I'm sure is your primary concern.
No, actually,
I just don't think the government can borrow.
My primary concern is freedom. And if we have a deficit that we can't pay for, then we don't have freedom, because the government has to get the money from somewhere, even if it prints it, which it's been doing for almost 100 years now. And that's a stealth tax without the Congress voting on it or without any of us even realizing it. Bruce Bartlett, I have enjoyed our conversation. I hope you'll come back and visit us again.
Anytime.
You can catch today's show on foxnews.com/freedomwatch and on Sirius 145 XM 168 or online at foxnewstalk.com at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.